It's 11:47 on a Friday night. Jordan Walsh is reading a text message he has already read 14 times. He is 36 years old, Portland, Oregon, senior architect at a firm he's been building his reputation inside for 9 years. By every visible measure, career, apartment, the kind of quiet confidence that reads well in rooms, he is a man with things assembled correctly. The text is 4 sentences. 4 sentences from a woman he has spent 2 years carefully, methodically, completely loving. And what the 4 sentences say, not brutally, not coldly, but with the clean precision of someone who has already made a decision and is informing rather than discussing, is that she is done. He is not crying. He is not angry. He is doing something more corrosive than either. He is completely, utterly, toxically attached to the outcome of something he cannot control, and he knows it, and he cannot stop. He has read the text 14 times looking for the door, the one sentence that opens differently, the qualifier that changes the meaning, the version of those 4 sentences that means something other than what they plainly mean. There isn't one. There is only the feeling, the specific, crushing sensation of caring so much about something that you have handed it without negotiation, without consent, without even fully realizing you were doing it, the authority to determine your entire interior weather. Jordan Walsh has been doing this his whole life, not just with her, with everything, with the promotion review, the client who went quiet, the friend who took 3 days to reply, the project that was criticized. Every single thing that mattered, he had loved it so fiercely and gripped it so completely that when it moved, even slightly, even naturally, the movement registered as devastation. What he doesn't know yet, reading that text for the 15th time in his kitchen in Portland at 11:47 p.m., is that what he's experiencing has a name. That the Stoics identified this precise mechanism 2,000 years ago. That they built a solution not out of coldness, not out of the emotional distance that most people mean when they say detach, but out of something far more sophisticated and far more rare. The capacity to love fully without being owned by the outcome. This is the story of how one man learned the difference, and why almost everything you've been told about emotional detachment is wrong. Before we go further, let's name the lie. The lie is this, that emotional detachment means caring less, that the goal is to reduce your investment, thin your feelings, build the kind of distance that protects you from being hurt because it protects you from being moved. This is not a philosophy. It is a wound pretending to be wisdom. The man who has decided to feel less in order to suffer less has not solved the problem. He has simply paid for protection with the most valuable currency he had. He traded his capacity for depth in exchange for the feeling of safety and discovered, usually years too late, that what he bought with that trade was not safety. It was emptiness. The emptiness that comes after the third relationship where he never quite showed up. The emptiness after the career that was competent but hollow, built on a safe distance from anything that could have truly mattered. The emptiness of a life where nothing could hurt him because nothing could reach him. That is not Stoic detachment. That is not what Marcus Aurelius practiced on the morning he buried his 5th child. That is not what Epictetus meant when he wrote about freedom from disturbance. What the Stoics taught, what the philosophy actually says, beneath the misquotes and the surface readings, is something much harder and much more liberating than caring less. It is caring fully, clearly, and without the hidden contract. The hidden contract is the piece nobody talks about. Jordan Walsh had been running the hidden contract his entire adult life. He learned it early, not from philosophy, not from deliberate instruction, but from the particular household arithmetic of a child who grew up with a father whose love was conditional in a way that was never stated and always felt. Not abusive, not absent, conditional. The version of his father that was warm, present, and approving was reliably available when Jordan performed well at school, in sports, in the public presentation of the family. The other version, quieter, more distant, carrying the specific temperature of withheld warmth, arrived when Jordan didn't. By the time he was 11, the mechanism was in place. Love as a variable, approval as a resource, worth as something that had to be continuously re-earned rather than something that simply was. He didn't know he was carrying this into adulthood. Nobody does. It doesn't announce itself. It arrives as a perfectly reasonable seeming set of priorities. Work hard, produce well, be reliable, earn the approval of people who matter. All of that is fine. The problem arrives in the hidden contract. The hidden contract says, I will give this fully my time, my effort, my genuine care, and in exchange, it will not leave. It will not be taken away. It will not be withdrawn without warning. In 4 sentences on a Friday night at 11:47 p.m., every time Jordan had invested in something in her, in the promotion, in the client relationship, in the project, the investment came with an unspoken clause. A condition buried so deep he couldn't have articulated it without months of careful excavation. I'm giving this everything I have, and in exchange, it owes me certainty. Outcomes don't sign contracts. Outcomes do what outcomes do. They arrive or they don't. They hold or they don't. They reflect the full complicated machinery of the world without the slightest awareness of what Jordan Walsh had spent investing in them. The outcome of the relationship was not a response to how hard he had loved. The 4 sentences were not a verdict on his worth. They were just what happened. But the hidden contract had been running for 25 years. And a man who has been operating under a hidden contract that long does not simply choose to stop on a Friday night in Portland. He has to find a different architecture entirely. The thing about Jordan that made his particular version of this especially expensive was that he was, by every observable standard, a highly functional person. He was not obviously anxious. He did not catastrophize aloud. He did not make scenes or become destabilized in ways that were visible to colleagues or friends. He was extremely good at managing the external. What he had never learned to manage was the transaction that happened on the inside every time he cared about something. His colleague Renata had told him once after a project review where he'd received strong criticism from a client and then spent 3 days at less than full capacity, quieter, flatter, running on the specific frequency of a man recalculating his value. She told him, "You take it too personally, Jordan. It's just feedback." He nodded. He'd thought about that sentence for 2 weeks. Not because it was wrong, but because it was accurate in a way he didn't know how to use. Too personally, yes. But what did that mean in practice? Not caring? Performing indifference? Becoming the kind of man who walked out of a client review genuinely unmoved? That didn't seem right either. The caring was what made his work good. The investment was what made his relationships real. The man who didn't take things personally wasn't better adjusted. He was less present. The question wasn't how to stop caring. The question was how to care without the hidden contract. He didn't have the language for it yet. He found it 3 weeks after the Friday text, in a place he wasn't looking, in a book he picked up because it was the only thing on his nightstand that wasn't her number in his phone. He found Seneca first, not Meditations that came later. Seneca's Letters to Lucilius, a collection of personal correspondence between one of Rome's most prominent intellectuals and a friend, written in Seneca's final years. Not a philosophical treatise. Letters, the personal, intimate, direct voice of a man thinking through how to live. Jordan read letter after letter in the specific way that grief makes reading possible, not analyzing, not studying, just absorbing, the way a dry material absorbs whatever it's placed in. And he found a line that stopped him completely. Nusquam est, qui ubique est. Nowhere is the man who is everywhere. He read the Latin, then the translation, then the Latin again. He wasn't sure initially what it had to do with the Friday text, or the hidden contract, or the specific devastation of reading 4 sentences 14 times. He sat with it for 2 days, and then it cracked open. The man who is everywhere is the man who has placed pieces of himself, pieces of his worth, his stability, his interior weather into every outcome he cares about, into the relationship, into the promotion, into the client's response, into the friend's reply time, distributed, scattered, exported into the external world and left there, without protection, at the mercy of events. Nusquam est. Nowhere. Because if you are in all of those places simultaneously, if your piece is contingent on all of those outcomes simultaneously, you are not anywhere. You are not present. You are a man vibrating at the frequency of every variable he cannot control. This was Jordan's precise condition. Not detached, the opposite. Hyper-attached in the specific way that looks like caring, but is actually the terror of losing. He kept reading. Seneca and Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius were teaching one thing about attachment, but they were teaching it from three different angles. And all three are required to understand why the common misreading fails. The first angle, preferred indifference. The Stoics had a category called adiaphora, translated as indifference, which covered everything external: health, wealth, relationships, reputation, outcomes of every kind. They were not good or bad in the Stoic vocabulary. They were preferred or dispreferred. You could prefer a relationship to end well over ending badly. You could prefer a promotion to rejection. You could prefer health to illness. But a preference is not a requirement. This is the precise distinction that most people miss, and it is the whole thing. A preference can be felt deeply, pursued genuinely, and invested in completely. A requirement is a hidden contract. A requirement says, this outcome must occur or my interior stability collapses. Jordan had been treating preferences as requirements his entire adult life. He preferred her to stay, felt it deeply, genuinely, with his full emotional range, but had operated as though her staying was a requirement for his basic functioning. The Stoic move is not to convert the preference into indifference. It is to convert the requirement back into a preference. You can want it fully and accept its absence without collapse. That is not coldness. That is the most sophisticated emotional move available to a human being. The second angle, the reserve clause. Marcus Aurelius wrote about acting with what he called the hupexeresis, the reservation, the caveat, the mental note attached to every intention. He described it like this: pursue what you pursue with full commitment, but always with the silent addition, unless something prevents it. Not, pursue it half-heartedly in case it doesn't work out. Not, protect yourself by not fully showing up. Show up completely, invest genuinely, love actually, work with full commitment. And in the same breath internally, without advertising it, unless something prevents it, this reservation does not reduce the quality of the action. It does not contaminate the love or dilute the work. What it does is remove the hidden contract. The attachment that causes suffering is not the love, it is the demand. The silent requirement that the love be returned in a specific form, on a specific timeline, without withdrawal or alteration. The reservation, unless something prevents it, is the release of the demand while keeping the love entirely intact. Jordan had been loving with full commitment and a complete absence of reservation. And every time the reservation arrived in a text, in a performance review, in a client's decision, it hit him not as information, but as betrayal. Because he hadn't built the clause in. The 4 sentences weren't a betrayal. They were something preventing it. He just didn't have the architecture to receive them that way. The third angle, the locus of value. This is the deepest level and the most uncomfortable. The reason the hidden contract exists, the reason preferences become requirements, is that the value of the self has been located externally. If my worth lives in whether she stays, then her leaving is not just loss, it is diminishment. It is the withdrawal of the thing that confirmed I was enough. If my worth lives in the client's approval, then the client's criticism is not just feedback, it is evidence against my adequacy. The Stoics' Epictetus, above all, with the precision of a man who had been owned by another person and had to locate his value somewhere that couldn't be taken, were teaching one thing underneath all the frameworks. Your value is not external. It cannot be given or withdrawn by any outcome. Character is the only thing that is genuinely yours. Not talent, not appearance, not the quality of your relationships, not the arc of your career. Character, the direction of your attention, the consistency of your conduct, the honesty of your judgment. Everything outside that is preferred or dispreferred. Nothing outside that is you. The man who has located his value in his own character, who knows what he did and how he did it, and whether it was aligned with who he intends to be, cannot be diminished by an outcome. The outcome can be painful. It can be genuinely significant. It can cost him things he wanted deeply, but it cannot reduce him. Because the thing it would need to reach to reduce him is not there. It is inside the line, in his jurisdiction, where no 4-sentence text can follow. The typical advice about emotional detachment fails for one of 2 reasons. Either it teaches suppression the instruction to feel less, invest less, care less, build the wall which produces the emptiness that drove the question in the first place. The wall keeps pain out. It keeps everything else out too. The man behind the wall is protected and alone and slowly hollowing out. Or it teaches performance the instruction to act as though you don't care, to perform the posture of detachment while the attachment runs unchecked underneath. This is even more corrosive than open attachment because it adds dishonesty to the cost. The man performing detachment knows he's performing. The gap between the performance and the reality is its own source of exhaustion. Neither of these is what Seneca was talking about. Seneca's detachment was not a wall. It was not a performance. It was a precise internal architecture that allowed full engagement with life, full love, full work, full investment, while keeping the value of the self clearly separated from the outcome of any specific pursuit. Full presence, full investment, full feeling. No hidden contract. The difference between a man who grieves and a man who is destroyed by grief is not the depth of the feeling. It is whether the thing he lost was carrying his sense of self along with it. You can grieve something deeply without it taking your adequacy with it when it goes. That is the target. Not the absence of feeling, the presence of a self that remains intact after the feeling moves through. Neuroscience has a name for the mechanism that makes attachment so consuming when value is located externally. It is called outcome-based self-esteem, and it operates through the same reward circuitry as every other form of dependency. When a person's self-esteem is contingent on external outcomes, on approval, success, the behavior of other people, the brain treats those outcomes the same way it treats any dopaminergic reward. The presence of the reward produces a temporary elevation. The withdrawal of the reward, the critical review, the relationship ending, the delayed response activates the same neural pathways as physical pain. Neuroimaging studies at UCLA in 2003 and again in 2011 showed that social rejection and physical pain activate overlapping regions of the brain, the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex and the anterior insula. The same structures, the same activation pattern. This is not metaphor, it is physiology. The man reading the 4-sentence text 14 times at 11:47 p.m. is not being melodramatic. His brain is processing the event as pain. Real, neurologically registered pain, indistinguishable in its circuitry from physical injury. The question is not whether the pain is real, it is. The question is whether the architecture that made a text message capable of triggering that pain response is the only available architecture. It is not. Studies on what psychologists call non-contingent self-worth, self-esteem that is not dependent on external outcomes consistently show lower cortisol responses to negative feedback, faster emotional recovery from setbacks, and significantly higher long-term well-being scores across nearly every metric. The Stoics did not have fMRI machines. They had 2,000 years of observation. They arrived at the same place, that the man whose worth lives outside himself is a man permanently at the mercy of the world, and the world is not a reliable custodian of anyone's worth. Put it somewhere it cannot be reached. Jordan did not become a different man in a weekend, but he began a practice. And the practice had a specific structure, not a vague instruction to detach or let go. A precise set of moves, executable, returnable to, that change the architecture over time. Move 1. Locate the contract. Before any significant investment, before the presentation, before the difficult conversation, before the decision to tell someone what you actually feel, ask one question with complete honesty. What am I requiring from this? Not what am I hoping for? Not what am I working toward? What am I requiring? What outcome, if it doesn't arrive, will I experience not as loss, but as evidence against my worth? That requirement is the contract. Name it. Not to eliminate the hope or the investment. To see the contract clearly, to bring it out of the implicit architecture and into the visible is the first act of dismantling it. Move 2. Add the reservation. After you've located the investment and named the contract, add Marcus Aurelius's clause. Not to yourself as a defeat, not as a hedge against caring, as an honest acknowledgement of the nature of external things. I am going to give this everything I have unless something prevents it. I am going to love this fully, and I accept that the outcome of that love is not within my authority. I am going to work for this completely, and I release the requirement that it return in the form I've imagined. This is not performance of indifference. This is the explicit, honest architecture that allows full commitment without the hidden contract. It feels strange the first time. It feels like giving something up. What you're actually giving up is the right to be destroyed by what you cannot control. That is not a loss worth mourning. Move 3. Return the value. After any significant outcome, after the text, after the review, after the conversation, ask one question before anything else. What do I know about how I conducted myself in this? Not, what does this mean about my worth? Not, what does this say about whether I am enough? What do I know about my own conduct? Did I love with honesty? Did I work with genuine effort? Did I show up with the quality I intended? If yes, the outcome, whatever it is, cannot diminish you. It can change your circumstances. It cannot change your character. And your character is the only jurisdiction where your worth actually lives. If no, note specifically what you would do differently, not what they did wrong, what you would change about your own conduct. That is data, that is useful. Everything else is weather. Move 4. Feel it fully. Forward. This is the part that most descriptions of Stoic detachment omit, and its omission is what creates the cold, empty version. Feel the grief. Feel the disappointment. Feel the full weight of a thing that mattered not going the way you worked for. The Stoics did not teach suppression. Marcus Aurelius wrote with unmistakable emotion about loss. Seneca described grief as an appropriate response to an appropriate thing. The instruction is not, do not feel. The instruction is, feel it and keep moving. Feel it in the direction of your next action, not in the direction of the question, what does this mean about me? The grief is information about how much it mattered. The question, what does this mean about me, is the hidden contract trying to reassert itself through the back door. Notice it, name it. Return to the grief that is simply grief, the appropriate response to genuine loss without the self-worth audit running alongside it. That is the full practice. People attempt this and fail in predictable patterns. First mistake, confusing detachment with distance. You cannot do this practice from a distance. The reserve clause, unless something prevents it, is added inside full commitment, not as a reason to give less. The man who gives 70% to protect himself from losing the 30% he withheld has not practiced Stoic detachment. He has practiced ordinary self-protection at the cost of ordinary return. Full investment. With the clause built in, not 60% investment plus 40% self-protection. Second mistake, using the practice to avoid the feeling. The 2-minute post-event question, what do I know about my conduct, is not a tool for bypassing the grief. It is asked after the feeling, not instead of it. Using the practice to avoid feeling is the suppression model wearing Stoic clothing. Feel first. Locate your value in your conduct second. In that order. Always. Third mistake. Treating it as a one-time insight instead of a daily practice. The hidden contract was installed over decades. It will not be fully dismantled by a single evening with Seneca. The practice, the pre-investment question, the reservation, the post-outcome return is daily maintenance, not a cure administered once. On good days, it takes 30 seconds. On days like the Friday in Portland, it takes longer. It always works. It just takes longer when the attachment was deeper, which means the days when it feels hardest to practice are precisely the days when the practice matters most. Here is what it costs to not do this. Not in abstract terms. In the specific arithmetic of a life, the man who locates his worth externally and never examines the hidden contract does not suffer more intensely than the man who does the practice. He suffers more repeatedly. Because the external world is not a reliable source of steady affirmation. It fluctuates, it withdraws without warning. It sends 4 sentences on a Friday night to men who have done everything right, and each time it does, the man without the practice is reset. Back to the beginning. Back to the question of whether he is enough. This reset has a cumulative cost that most people don't calculate clearly because it feels like a series of separate events rather than a single ongoing tax. The tax is not just emotional. Research on people with high outcome-dependent self-esteem shows significantly higher rates of decision avoidance, the tendency to not make choices in order to avoid the possibility of negative feedback. The man paying the tax doesn't just suffer more when things go wrong, he does less, because doing less reduces the exposure. He doesn't pitch the bold idea because rejection would cost too much. He doesn't start the thing he's been thinking about because failure would take him somewhere he doesn't want to go. He doesn't love with his full range because being fully loved and then losing it is a price he cannot afford at the exchange rate he's currently running. The hidden contract doesn't just make loss hurt more, it makes life smaller. Jordan Walsh still thinks about her sometimes. Not with the same frequency as that first winter. Not with the same texture. He thinks about her the way you think about something that genuinely mattered and genuinely ended with a specific, clean kind of recognition. Not the 14 reads, door-searching kind. The kind where you know what it was, honor what it cost, and keep your footing. He is still in Portland. Still at the same firm. He was promoted 8 months after the Friday in November, not because he suddenly performed differently, but because the energy he had been spending on the social monitoring and the worth auditing got redistributed to the actual work. The actual work improved. His director told him in the review, with the direct language of someone who had seen the shift even if he couldn't have named its cause, that in the last year, Jordan had become the kind of person the firm built things around. Jordan thanked him once. He didn't spend 3 days calculating what it meant about his worth. He knew what it meant, that he had shown up with the quality he intended, and the world had responded accordingly. Not because the world owed him a response, because that's what tends to happen when a man removes the hidden contract and brings his full range to what he's doing. He uses the practice, not every day, when he needs it. He was in a meeting last spring where a client rejected a proposal he'd spent 6 weeks building, rejected it cleanly, with some accuracy, in a room full of his colleagues. He sat with it for 4 seconds. What do I know about how I conducted myself in this? 6 weeks of genuine work, honest analysis, the best argument the data supported. Yes, yes, yes. Then the outcome belongs to the client. He moved to the next item on the agenda. His colleague Renata sent him a message afterward. How are you so calm? He thought about the question. Not because I don't care. Because I know where I keep the thing that matters. Seneca wrote his letters in the last years of his life knowing, in the way that men close to power often know, that his time was limited. He was writing to Lucilius, yes, but he was also, clearly, writing to himself, reminding himself in the specific way the Stoics had of reminding themselves publicly of things they struggled to practice privately. He was not a perfectly detached man. He was a wealthy, politically entangled man who struggled with comfort and safety and the approval of power. He wrote the letters anyway. And what he returned to, again and again, across 124 of them, was one fundamental recognition. The man who is free is the man who needs nothing from the external world to remain intact. Not the man who has everything. Not the man who has guaranteed the outcomes. The man whose worth lives somewhere the world cannot reach, cannot grade, cannot withdraw. That man can love fully, work completely, invest genuinely, and when the 4 sentences arrive, and they will arrive, in one form or another, in every life, he grieves what is real and keeps what is his. This is not a life of less. It is a life of more presence, more honesty, more genuine investment in the things that matter, because the investment no longer requires a guaranteed return to justify the risk. This is what it means to emotionally detach without feeling empty. Not emptiness. The opposite. Fullness without the tax. Before you close this video, I want you to find the contract. Not all of them. 1. Think about the thing you are currently invested in, the relationship, the project, the pursuit, and ask with complete honesty, what am I requiring from this? Not hoping, not working toward, requiring. Find the clause you wrote without knowing you wrote it. Name it, look at it directly, and then not to abandon the investment, not to love less or work less or care less, add the reservation. I am going to give this everything, and I accept that the outcome is not within my authority. That is not resignation. That is the most honest thing you can say about the nature of anything external. And it is the only thing that allows you to love fully without the hidden cost. Seneca got it right 2,000 years ago in letters that were never meant to outlast him. The man who is everywhere is nowhere. The man who has located what is his and keeps it clearly inside the only jurisdiction that cannot be taken is present, fully, in every room he enters, including the kitchen at 11:47 p.m. in Portland, including wherever you are reading this right now. If this reached something real, if some part of you recognized the hidden contract, share this with someone who's been running theirs for too long. Subscribe if you want more. Not for the algorithm, because there are more contracts to find. And finding them is the work.